I want you to close your eyes just for a second. And I want to take you back to actually your beginning. And I want you to imagine that you're a baby. This is one of those days where you're crawling around everywhere, scooting around. You're incredibly active. And all of a sudden, this is the big day. You're going to make that decision to stand on your two legs that you've never stood on before for the first time and take your first step. Notice who's around you. Notice how you might be feeling. So when you're ready, if you could just open your eyes and bring yourself back into the room. If you notice, we were born with a spirit that at that moment, there was this intention to walk. And the intention to walk was greater than our fear to fail or to fall down. And that spirit still lives in each and every one of us. And yet something happens along the way. Right? Sometimes we start to experience things in our lives and we forget. We don't understand what lives within us. I can tell you a personal story. I was a consultant in the IT world, and I made a decision to transition. This was maybe about 20 years ago, to run my own business and to become a coach and a facilitator. And I did take that first step. I ended up getting all the training you could imagine, and it checked that box, the technical box. I had the skills. And yet, it wasn't enough. I spent probably the next 5 years not moving forward. I was afraid to charge anyone for my work. So I really wasn't running a business. I was just giving away coaching. And it was terrifying. I didn't like to speak in front of people. And yet I wanted to be a facilitator. My face would literally shake. I could feel it doing like this. My heart would race, and I'm thinking, I need a paramedic. I can't speak. I literally was working for a consulting company. Why? Because I checked their box. I was a black woman, and they were looking for black facilitators and coaches. So they picked me. And it was wonderful tokenization. And yet, they told me, because of this incredible fear, that you may not be able to facilitate here. And it was in hearing those words that I knew I had to do something different. And there's this incredible shame that washed over me. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is, are we committed enough to try? What's your first step? Now, some of you may be thinking, because I've heard some of the stories, I've been around all of you, amazing people. You are taking the risk and you are doing things in the world. And sometimes that first step is the need to apologize to someone because you've said something or done something that had an unintended impact. It might be the need to maybe pull back a little bit and not take up so much oxygen in the room. Maybe we actually are telling people how to do things instead of creating a space for them. So whatever that first step is, it sometimes takes a lot of courage for us to take it. And it's not over after that. There's a need for us, once we take that first step, to be vulnerable enough to fail. And this is what's so fascinating. It's not just fail where nobody's watching. It's fail in public. We're in public spaces. People are going to see us as we're in this process of becoming more of ourselves, reaching our potential. I had the privilege of studying with Dr. Brené Brown, for those of you that have heard of her. She is a shame researcher. She talks about courage and vulnerability. And she defines vulnerability as three things. It's being emotionally exposed. It is facing risk and uncertainty. Here's the good news, I guess. We can't opt out of vulnerability. We're vulnerable because we're human. What we can do is we can put on armor. And many of us do this in ways that we don't know. And when we put on that armor, it prevents us from being seen. It gets in the way. So, what does it look like for us to be willing to fail publicly and take off that armor? I love this picture here, because when I saw it, it made me think about, with kids, when they fall, they might turn it into an exploration, a discovery process. So what would happen if we fail? What if we expected for our armor to crack each and every time we had a failure? What would we learn about ourselves if this is how we approach life? I have the privilege of working with a lot of leaders. I've coached over 1,000 leaders in my life. And unfortunately, this is really a big challenge. I talk to leaders who have been working for 30 years in their field, and they actually lose confidence over time. You may think this is only true for junior leaders. It's not. I have leaders who are part of organizations where they don't feel like they belong. They're introverts. They're people of color. There's something unique and different about them. They lose their sponsorship. And so they tell me, because when you create a safe space for people, the armor does come off, and the truth comes out. And they let me know what they're struggling with. And so these are the types of things that we have to be aware of in organizations. And one of the things that I talk to leaders about is this idea of maybe confidence isn't the thing you need. Because I can tell you, if I waited on confidence, I wouldn't be standing here. It would have never come. What I have done is I've learned a hack, and that is courage. Courage is always available. It's unlimited. It's feeling the fear and doing it anyway. It's one of those things, when you think about it, the confidence actually is an outcome of courage. Maya Angelou talks about courage being the most important of all the virtues, and that was mentioned earlier, because without courage, we cannot practice any of the other virtues. I want to leave you with 3 tips for being hip. I don't know if any of you are part of the decade when I was growing up. This is a thing, right? It was cool to be hip. And so these are 3 hip tips to being a human in progress. One is to fail forward. It's proven that it's important for us to fail intelligently and fast. This is why kids outperform business leaders every time, because they don't carry that baggage that we often will carry, this need to get it perfect and get it right, and believe that if we don't, there's something wrong with us. So failing forward is important, taking in feedback from others without putting up a wall and defending what it is that people are telling us about ourselves. There should be no negative self-realizations. I talk to leaders about this. If you discover that maybe you're not being as inclusive as you thought you were, this is a moment to celebrate. Because believe me, the people in your life are clapping to know that you discovered this. So Be willing to fail. Be willing to learn and discover what it is that you might need to work on. The next one is to be patient. What I love about this word, if you look up the etymology of patience, it's the Latin word pati, and it means to suffer. Right? And part of this is suffering ourselves, suffering what we learn about ourselves, what we discover that maybe we didn't want to hear. It might be suffering the person who told it to us. Or maybe it's a circumstance. But can we be patient and meet ourselves where we are? Often we compare ourselves. And you probably heard that is just the thief of joy, because we're all different. We're unique. We have these unique fingerprints, and we came here to do something unique in the world. So be patient with yourself. And then, can you enjoy the process? Do you raise your hands in the air once you've done something, even if you didn't do it as great as you thought you did? At least you did your best. Can you enjoy the process and celebrate the progress? I think we're often hard on ourselves and don't believe that we're progressing. Baby steps matter. And I want to leave you with something. First of all, for those of you that are actually thinking, I already do these things, this talk isn't for me. Yet you're running organizations, and there are people in those organizations that are struggling, much like I was. So are you paying attention? Are you seeing their struggles? Are you there to create an environment where you can encourage them to get out of their way? In order for us to have walked one day, somebody had to get out of our way. They did not walk for us. I see leaders all the time trying to give people the answers, give people the space to grow. Diana Nyad, at the age of 64, she actually swam on the 5th attempt from Havana, Cuba, to Key West, Florida. Okay? They don't even know how she did this. It wasn't humanly possible. They believe that she had to tap into that spirit that we talked about, that she connected to, that we all have, that lives within us. So if you're finding yourself in a situation where you do find challenging moments where you can't take that next step, just like Diana Nyad, find a way.
Think of sharing what you know.